that we can take on it. We'll do that in a little bit. But I promised a quarterback that maybe would change the conversation with regard to Brock Purdy. Since so many are comfortable playing the what if. What if Brock Purdy were a Jack? What if Trevor Lawrence were a Niner? All right. What about this one? What if C.J. Stroud's deal was up right now? What do you think he would get?
He would get probably $57.5 million a year with a guarantee that either matched or surpassed Trevor Lawrence.
Okay.
And yesterday, FP and I did a who would you rather have conversation, and he brought up C.J. Stroud or Brock Purdy, and I said I'd rather have C.J. Stroud.
I think you'd probably rather have C.J. Stroud. I'll go with you on that.
I do think it's close, and it's a really small sample for C.J. Stroud, but physical tools probably a little bit better, and what he showed last year that he can do at this level is remarkable.
Remarkable. So, yeah, I'm not here to – it's not even about, like, what if C.J. were a Niner and Brock were a Texan. The reason I bring up C.J. Stroud, though, is to highlight some of the things that we do to Brock that I just don't see us do to other players, and why I keep calling it an ism, draft-ism. And it's this. C.J. Stroud has, first of all, only played 15 football games, and that is not counting his playoff experience, which, by the way, was not great. But he played 15 regular season football games, C.J. Stroud. Now, I would argue that based on, now granted they're young, but based on the contract that Nico Collins just got, the wonderment that was the Tank Dell experience, Dalton Schultz being his tight end, don't forget his coaching staff is falling off of the Kyle Shanahan tree. There's that too. You're playing indoors, so you are largely unaffected by elements. Sure, there are road games, but think about the places where the Texans often go. They go to Jacksonville and Tennessee and indoor games in Indianapolis. Sure, there's a couple games, whatever, but like CJ's got a lot of the stuff that supposedly people use as evidence that Brock is inflated. I really think that's the quickest way to say what people do to Brock. If I were to expand on draftism, it's not that any of you think Brock's not good. You just think he's inflated. Chris Sims thinks he's inflated. There's too much good going on around him, and it makes Brock look better than he actually is. And I can be open-minded to that. I still don't think it's relevant. Sometimes you get lucky breaks in life.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get bad breaks in life. Brock maybe caught a lucky break being drafted by the 49ers with the last pick in the draft and then having people's bodies break down in front of him and walking onto a football field with Debo on his left, Brandon on his right, Trent Williams right in front of him, and George Kittle over there too. Maybe, and Christian McCaffrey behind him. Sure, lucky break. C.J. Stroud has got a ton going for him with regard to his surroundings. Nobody thinks he's inflated. And if his contract were up today, after 15 regular season games, I don't think many people would blink if he got 60.
Yeah, exactly. I do think he resets the market, for sure. He becomes the highest paid quarterback in the history of the game.
There you go.
Based on 1 year. And we wouldn't small sample size him, and we wouldn't look at the system. Nobody would look at DeMeco Ryans and say, well, I mean, you could clearly see that DeMeco Ryans is the reason. And I would still say that Brock's weapons are better than his, but this year becomes an interesting one for C.J. Stroud. And I mentioned this yesterday to FP Santangelo, who was filling in for you. The expectation for the Houston Texans this year is through the roof.
Yep.
I don't know what their overall win-loss, the win total in Vegas is.
I'll get that.
I would guess it's at least 9.5. And I would expect that they're the favorites.
I would think it's even more than that.
Right. And that I think is the point about what people think the Texans should be.
You nailed it. It's 9.5.
Right. And they have got to be the favorites, right, to win the division over Jacksonville and over Indy.
Indy is 8.5. Jacksonville is 8.5. And the Titans are 6.5. So, yeah, there you go.
There you go. And all of that is on the back of an improved skill collection, but also C.J. Stroud being a guy who, and I could look up what his MVP odds are. He's probably less than 20-1 to win the MVP. I would say he's top 7 in the MVP.
You're making me
voting.
do a lot of Googling here.
It's funny because FP did the exact same thing to me yesterday. He hit me with like 4 straight.
Google.
I could have done it.
You got to Google it.
Normally the show works best when you talk and I Google, although you are a pretty good Googler.
CJ Stroud is the 3rd pick for NFL MVP.
Okay, there you go.
Plus 850. I'm sorry, he's tied for 2nd.
Behind Mahomes and tied with Josh Allen,
Correct.
Right? Okay.
In front of Burrow, in front of Jordan Love, in front of Lamar Jackson.
And McCaffrey and Purdy.
And Purdy. Purdy comes before McCaffrey, way before McCaffrey.
Okay.
Purdy's plus 1,400. McCaffrey's plus 4,000.
Jeez. All right.
Yeah, Purdy is in front of Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert, Tua, Anthony Richardson, Matthew Stafford. There's Trevor Lawrence at plus 3,000, and then McCaffrey comes in as the first non-QB.
Look at Brock getting his flowers.
Yeah, Brock is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, tied for 5th with Lamar and Jordan Love.
That's a little surprising, that he's getting that much respect.
But I don't think I'd pay him, Dan.
I mean. So let's say he comes in 5th in the MVP.
Yeah.
That would mean he had a year.
$57 million.
Right. Last year he came in 5th in the MVP, did he not?
Yes, and there's 2 different things I think that an athlete can achieve, and this is important. That you can burst on the scene, CJ Stroud, and be good, and then there's what you're talking about. Now can you be good when everyone sees you coming, right? It's no different than what Luis Matos did. Where you can come up, hit the ball all over the yard, and then they're like, dude, throw him a curveball outside, off the plate. All right, let's send him back to Sacramento. That's what happens in pro sports. It's another reason why I'm so impressed with Brock Purdy. It's one thing, you hucked into the middle of a year, and yes, you've got a very good team, and you kept it together, and then you got to the NFC title game, and your arm fell off. All right, so that's one experience. But the next year, you're both coming off arm surgery. And I still think there's an untold story there in terms of what was happening early in the year for Brock.
Yeah,
because they've made insinuations that he's still working his way back first half of the season. But at the same time, expectations could not have been higher. 49ers Super Bowl favorite, and then he comes in and he goes. He comes in and he goes, and he has second half comebacks in playoff games, even though those playoff games were not his best efforts. And he has a pretty good performance in the Super Bowl, not great, but pretty good. And they go to overtime, and they lose to Patrick Mahomes. And a lot of people are like, yeah, still not great, just not very impressed. Here's the wild thing. Everything that anybody could say to this conversation, if you ask me, I don't think you sound unreasonable. My answer, though, is, but that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't make the rules. Do you know what I mean? Like 925 on the CJ Stroud Brock thing. Brock walked into a stacked team. Stroud was a rookie who took the Texans to the playoffs. Pretty simple concept. Okay, couple things here. First of all, just because the world misconstrued who the Texans were, that's not anybody's fault. Oh, he took a terrible team. No, they weren't a terrible team.
They were 0-0 to start the year, I think.
Right, and they actually had a young receiving core that we didn't know was there. You have a coach who we love here, who showed that he is all that, and they actually had a little bit of a thing going there. And still, by the way, it's not like they blew the doors off the league. Where'd they go, 10-7? 10-7. Okay, they were pretty good. I'm high on them as well. But the bottom line is you can't use those misconceptions. And I would argue that he also walked into a stacked team. We just didn't know they were stacked. You didn't know who Nico Collins and Tank Dell were at the beginning of the year.
Right.
Now you do. And you could say, well, CJ made them. I don't think so. The Texans don't think so. They just paid Nico. They just paid him like $23 million a year. They think he's a fantastic player. I do too. So CJ actually walked into a better situation than we realized. And then the whole ... is, I just don't know if it matters. You get who you get, and if you perform, you perform. We know that contracts are based on comps. I'd love to hear somebody actually sit in front of Brock and his agent and argue against him being north of $50 million when Goff is and Trevor Lawrence is, and by then Tua will be, and all of these people who have achieved.
Dak probably will be.
All of these people who have achieved less. What is it you're going to say to him? And again, this is based on the idea that he does it again.
Right.
For another year.
Well, and as I said, even if he has a Trevor Lawrence year where they go 9-8 and he throws for 4,000 yards and he has 21 touchdowns and 14 picks, which that'd be a bad year for Brock relative to what we've seen, and it'd be a bad year for the Niners. If they go 9-8 and they miss the playoffs and he has that kind of a year, he's still probably getting $50 million. He might not get 55 or 57.5, but he's still going to be north of $50 million, I would argue.
I agree with you. It's just a funny debate because I think everybody's doing I would this and I would that. You don't have a choice.
Right.
Does anybody want to change the conversation to that and give us the surprising answer? Because I don't think it's about what would you pay him. The question is, do you want him to be your quarterback,
right,
or do you want someone else? Because if you don't want to pay him 50, I'd argue you're actually saying, I don't want him as the quarterback. Does anybody next year want to go back to the draft? Do you want to do that?
Or go to free agency?
Right. Is that does anybody want
yourself who you'd rather have? Because you're going to have to pay somebody. It's either you let Brock walk and you go with a rookie or somebody's backup, Darnold or Dobbs or somebody of that ilk, or you draft somebody and you start a rookie, which you're not going to do with a championship level team, or you pay somebody else in free agency. So what are we even talking about?
What are we talking about? Tim in Fairfield here on Willard and Dibs. Hi, Tim. What are you doing?
What's going on, fellas? How's it going?
Great.
So I take issue with comparing the Texans' weapons to the Niners' weapons. It's apples and oranges. You can't even compare them.
The word compare is maybe not necessarily, I don't think anybody here would argue that of course, the Niners have better talent. My point was CJ has good talent. CJ has very, very good talent around him. A lot of teams do. A lot of players do. I don't hear, and maybe, Tim, this would be a better question. Is there any other quarterback in the NFL who you believe is elevated above what his actual talent is because of what's going on around him? Or is that only Brock?
That's a great question, but I do have to say that I feel like Brock is that guy. I think he is elevated. I feel like paying him would be a huge mistake.
So you want someone else quarterback in the Niners after this year?
I think so. I want to see how the year goes. You know, no one's talking about this Super Bowl hangover that hits a lot of teams in the following year when they lose the Super Bowl. If the Niners are sitting with a top 20 draft pick, then I think you've got to look at drafting a guy.
Okay, listen. Hey, Tim, thank you for calling.
Yeah.
I really respect the idea that you're willing to speak what I know is an unpopular opinion. But Tim had it. He's like, yeah, I think maybe we move on to a different quarterback next year.
Tim's got guts. Some gutsy calls what that was.
But no, if that's your opinion, then that's your opinion.
Yeah. I
just think that's the actual conversation we're having here. This idea, you're not allowed, you can't have Brock for $45 million. That's off the table.
Right.
That's a no.
He's not going to take a hometown discount, Mark?
He's not doing that.
No.
Unless something really weird happens this year. Again, there is a backdrop here. We have to assume that nothing crazy happens this year. I'm going to assume that Brock is largely healthy and that the 49ers are at least pretty good. They have a pretty good year. Trevor got this off of a 9-8 miss of the playoffs.
Right.
As a massive divisional favorite.
With 21 touchdowns and 14 picks.
With a huge,
as I mentioned.
And an early lead in that division.
Yeah. And a late fade. And you look at Houston and they won 3 of their last 4, including, wins over the Jacksonville Jaguars earlier in the year. And so you start to look at what a bad year would mean for Brock Purdy. How bad would it have to be? He'd have to look shaky, and the things that we've grown to expect from him, the reading, the poise, the delivery of the football, all those things would have to really go away quickly.
Yeah. there's also just this, and I know there's no way around this. This fight happened online all year after every Niner game last year.
Yeah.
It's like there's a wide open receiver, and then someone like Chris Sims or whatever will be like, what are we talking about here? Like any quarterback could hit that wide open receiver. And then someone will fight back with video of Brock Purdy ducking a sack and then like backpedaling out of the pocket, running around in different directions, creating something with his legs, and achieving a first down. And people will be like, does that look like the system to you? Is that a system job? And we'll go back and forth and back and forth. The bottom line is there is video. If you're watching the football game, Brock Purdy is not just snapping the ball and doing things on schedule. He's not. If he did, they don't go to the Super Bowl last year. I know people, and this is one thing that gets me. Chris Sims right now has got absolute guns blazing on Brock's postseason performances last year. He didn't like them. Okay, they weren't always great. At times, they were bad. In the fourth quarter of the games against the Green Bay Packers and Detroit Lions, Brock did unbelievable off-schedule, off-plan things that won those football games. And I just don't hear anyone accounting for that very much. It's right there for everybody to see. Like, he's completely doing things that had nothing to do with Kyle Shanahan.
Right. And, I mean, ultimately, you can look at whatever you want to look at as far as your metrics. And, the guy completed 69% of his passes, which was fourth best in the league, 69.4, in fact. And he was right up there at the top with the best quarterbacks in football, and he won games. So if you don't want a guy who is very, very accurate and he wins and he leads the entire NFL in quarterback rating, what are we even debating as far as what